morning sun barely crested the rooftops of Newmarket, but the Tattersall's auction grounds already pulsed with a nervous energy. The air was thick with the scent of hay, sweat, and anticipation. Stable hands whispered in clipped tones, their eyes flickering toward the presentation ring, where a storm was brewing. Nix, the million-pound colt everyone had come to see, was losing his mind. He reared, hooves lashing out, nostrils flaring, eyes wild with a fear that no amount of coaxing could soothe. The crowd pressed closer, a living wall of expectation and anxiety. Trainers muttered about ruined bloodlines. Investors tallied losses in their heads. And then, through the chaos, a girl stepped forward. Awkward, slight, her hands tucked deep into the pockets of an oversized jacket. Isla Clarke, 17, moved like a shadow, silent and nearly invisible except for the way the light caught in her dark hair. She didn't try to speak to Nix. She didn't even reach out a hand. Instead, she simply stood a few feet away, closed her eyes, and breathed. In, out. Slow, steady, as if her lungs were the metronome for the world. The effect was immediate and uncanny. Nix's frenzy ebbed, his trembling muscles stilled. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath as the colt lowered his head, eyes softening, drawn into Isla's quiet gravity. For a moment, it was as if the two of them, girl and horse, existed in a pocket of silence, untouched by the noise and judgment swirling around them. A ripple of disbelief swept through the crowd. Some gaped, others edged back, uncertain whether they'd witnessed a miracle or a trick of the light. A man in a worn tweed jacket, David Clarke, Isla's father, watched from the sidelines. A mixture of pride and helplessness etched into his features. He knew this side of his daughter, the one who could reach creatures no one else could, but who shrank from the simplest human conversation. Isla opened her eyes, feeling Nix's heartbeat echo in her own chest. She understood him in a way she'd never managed with people. With animals, there was no need for words, no tangled expectations or sideways glances, just presence, just trust. But as the applause started, hesitant, then growing, Isla's peace shattered. The weight of 100 stares pressed down on her, and she shrank back, shoulders hunching, wishing she could disappear. Someone in the crowd raised a phone, recording the moment. Isla caught the flash of the screen and froze, panic rising. She'd come here for the horses, not the spectacle. But it was too late. Within hours, the video would rocket across social media. The caption, not "Brave Girl," but "The Horse Witch of Newmarket." The name stuck, sparking both fascination and fear. Was it talent or something darker? That night, as Isla sat curled on her narrow bed, the world outside her window spun with rumors. Her father tried to reassure her, but Isla only shook her head. "They don't understand," she whispered, voice barely audible. "They never do." David squeezed her shoulder, wishing he could bridge the gap between her and the world, but knowing he never quite could. The next morning, Isla walked the halls of her high school with her head down. Whispers trailed behind her like smoke. "Did you see the video? She's so weird. Maybe she really is a witch." Isla's only refuge was the corner of the schoolyard where Barney, her rescue dog, waited. She knelt beside him, burying her face in his fur, letting his steady warmth anchor her. But the storm outside was only growing. On a talk show that afternoon, Dr. Alistair Finch, a respected, sharp-tongued authority on animal behavior, watched Isla's video with thinly veiled contempt. "This is reckless," he declared, voice tight with something more than professional skepticism. "Unpredictable. Dangerous. There must be an investigation." The host pressed for details. But Finch only shook his head, jaw clenched. You don't play with lives, not human or animal. Back at school, Isla's isolation deepened. Her classmates' taunts grew bolder, their laughter sharper. Hey, horse whisperer, gonna put us all in a trance? Isla tried to ignore them, but the words stung. That night, she sat on the kitchen floor, Barney's head in her lap, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Her father hovered nearby, torn between anger and helplessness. Then, just as Isla was about to retreat into herself completely, her phone buzzed. An email, subject line encrypted, sender unknown. The message was brief. You're not alone, I can help. Arthur Coleman. Isla's heart skipped. The name was a ghost in the world of horse racing, whispered in stories of genius and scandal. Why would he reach out to her? David, ever the historian, recognized the name instantly. Over mugs of tea, he recounted the legend. Arthur Coleman, once the brightest star in the racing world, had vanished after a mysterious accident and a storm of accusations. He'd been Dr. Finch's greatest rival, and rumor had it, his closest friend. But something had torn them apart, something no one ever spoke of directly. As Isla and her father scoured the internet for clues, the mystery only deepened. Old articles, half-buried forum threads, fragments of a story that didn't quite fit together. Arthur's invitation was both a lifeline and a warning. David's voice trembled as he cautioned Isla. This could be dangerous. He's not just controversial, he's radioactive. If you go down this road, there's no turning back. But for Isla, the choice was already made. She'd spent her life on the outside, watching others connect in ways she never could. Now, for the first time, someone saw her difference as a gift, not a curse. The promise of understanding, of belonging, burned brighter than her fear. That night, Isla packed a small bag and slipped out before dawn. The train to Wales rattled through the countryside, carrying her away from everything she'd known and into the heart of a mystery that would change her life forever. As the landscape blurred past, Isla pressed her forehead to the glass, heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. She was stepping into the unknown, not just for herself, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by the secrets she was about to uncover. And somewhere, in a lonely house at the edge of the Brecon Beacons, Arthur Coleman waited, watching the horizon for the girl who might finally break the silence that had haunted them all. The world outside Isla's window had become a storm. In the days after the auction, her name was everywhere, on news tickers, in viral videos, on the lips of strangers who had never met her but felt entitled to judge. At school, the halls felt narrower, the air heavier. Isla moved through them like a ghost, hugging the wall, eyes fixed on the floor, every step echoing with whispers and snickers. "Horsewitch," someone hissed as she passed. Another voice, sharper, "Freak." She kept walking, her face a mask of indifference, but inside, each word landed like a blow. In the classroom, the tension was palpable. Isla slid into her seat at the back, trying to make herself invisible. The teacher's voice was a distant hum, drowned out by the relentless ping of notifications on her phone. She dared not look. She already knew what she'd find. Memes, doctored images, endless speculation about her powers. The world had decided she was something to be feared, or mocked, or both. But the real storm was raging elsewhere. On a glossy morning show set, beneath the glare of studio lights, Dr. Alastair Finch sat ramrod straight, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. The host played the now infamous video of Isla and Nix, pausing at the moment the horse stilled, as if hypnotized. Dr. Finch, the host began, what do you make of this? Is this girl a prodigy, or is something more dangerous at work? Finch's lips pressed into a thin line. What I see is reckless, he said, his voice clipped and precise. Unpredictable. Animal behavior is not a parlor trick. It's science. And when we allow untested methods, when we encourage the public to believe in magic instead of evidence, we put lives at risk. This demands a formal investigation. The studio audience murmured. The host pressed, but isn't it possible she's just gifted? Finch's eyes flashed, a flicker of something raw beneath the surface. Gifted, or lucky, or simply playing with fire? He turned to the camera, his voice rising. We owe it to these animals, and to ourselves, not to be seduced by spectacle. There are rules for a reason. The segment went viral within hours. Finch's words were clipped and shared, fueling a digital wildfire. Commentators took sides. Some called Isla a visionary, a new kind of healer. Others, emboldened by Finch's authority, called for her to be banned from all stables, for her father to be investigated, for the witchcraft to be stamped out before it spread. Back in Newmarket, Isla's world shrank to a single safe place. The overgrown corner of the schoolyard, where Barney, her battered old rescue dog, waited for her every day. She knelt beside him, burying her face in his coarse fur, letting the steady thump of his tail ground her. Here, there were no cameras, no accusations, just the simple, wordless comfort of another living being who didn't care about the world's noise. But even Barney couldn't shield her from everything. In the corridors, the bullying escalated. Someone scrawled "witch" in red marker across her locker. In the cafeteria, a tray of food was knocked from her hands, laughter ringing in her ears as she knelt to clean up the mess. Isla's father, David, saw the bruises, emotional and physical, but his attempts to intervene only made things worse. They're just scared of what they don't understand, he told her, voice trembling with helplessness. Isla nodded, but the words felt hollow. Understanding was a luxury she'd never been granted. Meanwhile, the media circus intensified. Clips of Isla's silent communion with Nyx were dissected by experts and armchair critics alike. One night, as Isla scrolled through the avalanche of vitriol, she stumbled across a panel debate on ITV. Dr. Finch was there again, this time facing off against a younger, more sympathetic animal behaviorist. The younger man argued for open-mindedness, for the possibility that Isla's approach might reveal something new. Finch cut him off, voice icy. We don't gamble with lives, not after what happened before. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Isla felt a chill run through her. What had happened before? What was Finch so desperate to keep buried? That night, Isla lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the questions swirling. She remembered the way Finch's eyes had darted away from the camera, the tremor in his voice. There was something personal in his crusade against her, something more than professional skepticism. The next morning, Isla found herself summoned to the principal's office. Her father was already there, his face drawn and anxious. The principal, a stern woman with tired eyes, slid a stack of printed emails across the desk. We've received complaints, she said. Parents are concerned. Some of your classmates feel unsafe. Isla stared at her hands, unable to speak. David tried to argue, but the principal cut him off. We're not here to judge, but we have to consider the well-being of all our students. Perhaps it would be best if Isla took some time away. Outside, the sky was gray and heavy. Isla walked home in silence, Barney trotting at her side. She felt numb, hollowed out. The world had always been a place of sharp edges, but now it felt like it was closing in, squeezing the air from her lungs. That evening, as Isla sat at the kitchen table, her father hovered nearby, torn between anger and despair. "We'll fight this," he said. But Isla only shook her head. "It's not worth it," she whispered. "They've already decided." Just as she was about to retreat to her room, her phone buzzed. An email, subject line encrypted, sender unknown. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "You're not alone. I can help. Arthur Coleman." The name sent a jolt through Isla. She'd heard it before, in whispered stories and half-remembered news reports. Arthur Coleman, once the brightest mind in horse racing, had vanished after a scandal that no one would discuss openly. Some said he'd been ruined by rivals, others that he'd simply lost his nerve. But all agreed, Coleman was a legend, a ghost, a warning. Isla's father recognized the name instantly. Over mugs of tea, he recounted the legend. Arthur Coleman and Alistair Finch had once been inseparable, partners, friends, pioneers. But something had torn them apart, something that left scars on both men and cast a shadow over the entire racing world. As Isla and David scoured the internet for clues, the story unfolded in fragments. Old articles spoke of a tragic accident, a promising young jockey left paralyzed, a horse named Gladiator at the center of it all. Coleman had championed new, gentler methods Finch had publicly denounced after the accident. The rupture was total, the fallout devastating. Now, years later, Coleman was reaching out to Isla, not as a mentor, but as a fellow exile. His message was both a lifeline and a warning. "If you want answers, come find me. But know that the truth is never simple." David hesitated, fear etched deep in the lines of his face. "This could ruin you," he warned. "Coleman is radioactive. If you're seen with him—" Isla interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have to know. I can't stay here, Dad. Not like this." That night, Isla packed a small bag. Before dawn, she slipped out of the house, Barney at her heels. The train to Wales rumbled through the sleeping countryside, each mile carrying her further from the world that had rejected her and closer to the heart of a mystery that had haunted her life from the shadows. As the landscape changed, fields giving way to wild hills, the air growing colder and sharper, Isla pressed her forehead to the window, heart pounding with equal parts fear and hope. She was stepping into the unknown, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, misunderstood, or cast out for being different. In the distance, the mountains loomed, ancient and silent, holding secrets that had waited too long to be unearthed. And somewhere among them, Arthur Coleman waited, ready to teach Isla not just how to heal, but how to fight for the right to be herself. The kitchen was silent, except for the soft hum of the laptop and the occasional clink of a teacup. Isla and her father sat side by side, the glow of the screen illuminating their tired faces as they scrolled through page after page of search results. Each headline seemed to echo the same refrain: Arthur Coleman, prodigy or pariah? The fall of a racing legend. Scandal still shadows exiled horsemen. The further they dug, the more the legend of Arthur Coleman blurred into rumor and myth. Some called him a genius, a pioneer who had once revolutionized the world of horse racing with his unconventional, gentle methods. Others painted him as reckless, even dangerous, a man whose career had been shattered by a single catastrophic incident. David sipped his tea, voice low and hesitant as he recounted what he remembered. Years ago, Arthur Coleman and Alistair Finch had been inseparable. Friends, colleagues, and rivals who pushed each other to greatness. Together, they'd challenged the old ways, arguing that horses were not machines to be broken, but sentient beings to be understood. Their partnership was the talk of the industry, their results undeniable. But then came the accident, a day that changed everything. A young jockey, Finch's own son, was left paralyzed after a horrific fall. The horse at the center of it all was Gladiator, Coleman's pride and joy. The blame fell squarely on Arthur. His soft methods, critics said, had failed when it mattered most. Finch turned on him, and the racing world followed suit. Overnight, Arthur Coleman became a ghost, his name spoken only in whispers. Isla listened, heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and dread. The email from Arthur was still open on her phone, its message brief but charged with possibility. "You're not alone. I can help." It was the first time anyone had reached out to her not with suspicion or scorn, but with understanding. Yet David's worry was palpable. "If you go to him," he warned, "you'll be stepping into the middle of a war that's been raging for years. People will talk. They'll say you're just like him. Reckless. Dangerous. Are you ready for that?" Isla hesitated, her mind spinning with images of the past week. The jeers in the school hallway, the cold stares of her teachers, the endless barrage of online abuse. She had already been marked as an outsider, a threat. What difference would it make now? But beneath her fear, a stubborn spark of defiance flared. "I need to know the truth," she said quietly. "I need to know if I'm really as dangerous as they say, or if there's another way." That night, Isla packed a small bag. She moved through the house like a shadow, pausing only to scratch Barney behind the ears and whisper a promise. "We're going to find someone who understands." Before dawn, she slipped out the door, her father watching from the window, torn between pride and terror. The train ride to Wales was long and winding, the countryside shifting from gentle hills to wild, brooding mountains. Isla pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the world blur past. Each mile felt like a shedding of old skin, a step away from the suffocating judgment of Newmarket and toward something unknown, maybe even redemptive. Arthur Coleman's home was nothing like Isla had imagined. Tucked into a remote corner of the Brecon Beacons, it was more sanctuary than estate. A cluster of weathered stone buildings, half swallowed by ivy and wildflowers, perched on the edge of a windswept moor. The air was sharp and clean, tinged with the scent of earth and rain. Horses grazed in distant paddocks, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they too were healing from old wounds. Arthur himself was waiting by the gate, a tall, spare man with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold both storm and sunlight. He didn't smile, but there was a gentleness in the way he regarded Isla, a recognition, perhaps, of someone who had also been cast out. "You made it," he said simply, his voice roughened by years of silence. They spoke little at first. Instead, Arthur led Isla across the fields to a secluded pasture where a single horse stood apart from the rest. Gladiator was magnificent even in his solitude, muscles coiled beneath a battered coat, eyes dark and haunted. Isla felt the weight of his gaze, an unspoken question hanging between them. She approached slowly, matching her breath to the rhythm of the wind. Letting the silence settle around them like a blanket, Arthur watched from a distance, arms folded, his face unreadable. After a long while, he spoke. "He hasn't let anyone near him in years, not since the accident." His words hung in the air, heavy with memory, They said it was my fault, that I trusted too much, that I believed in something that wasn't real. Finch, he needed someone to blame. I gave him that. But the truth is, I don't know anymore. Isla reached out, her fingers trembling as she brushed Gladiator's mane. She felt a tremor pass through the horse, a shudder of pain and longing so raw it nearly undid her. For a moment, she saw not just the animal before her, but the boy he had carried, the dreams that had shattered in a single heartbeat. She understood then that her journey was not just about learning to heal horses, it was about healing the people who loved them, too. Arthur's voice broke the spell. You have a gift, Isla, but it's a dangerous one. People fear what they don't understand. They'll try to use you or destroy you. You have to decide what kind of healer you want to be. As dusk fell, a sleek black car wound its way up the gravel drive. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, carrying an envelope embossed with the seal of the Royal Veterinary Council. Arthur took it with a grimace, his hands shaking as he read. It's from Finch, he said, voice tight. They're demanding an official assessment of Gladiator. 30 days to prove he's fit, or they'll put him down. The news hit Isla like a blow. The fragile peace of Arthur's sanctuary was shattered, replaced by a ticking clock and the threat of irrevocable loss. Arthur's composure cracked, anger and desperation flickering in his eyes. They want a spectacle, he spat. They want you to perform, to save him with a wave of your hand. But healing doesn't work like that. It takes time. It takes trust. Isla felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders, a burden not just of talent, but of history. She was no longer just a student. She was the last hope for a wounded horse, a broken man, and a truth long buried beneath layers of guilt and blame. For a moment, she wanted to run, to disappear back into the safety of anonymity. But then she looked at Gladiator, at the pain and hope mingled in his gaze, and she knew she couldn't turn away. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But we do it my way. No tricks, no shortcuts, just trust. Arthur nodded, a flicker of pride softening his features. Then let's begin. As night fell over the wild Welsh hills, Isla stood in the darkened stable, one hand resting on Gladiator's neck, the other clutching the hope that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. Not just for horses, but for people too. The journey ahead would be fraught with risk and doubt, but for the first time, Isla felt something like belonging. In the company of the exiled mentor, in the shadow of old wounds, she was ready to fight for a future where difference was not a curse, but a gift. The wind that swept across the Brecon beacons that morning was sharp, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant echo of hooves. Isla awoke to the sound of silence, a silence so deep it pressed against her chest, making each breath feel precious and fragile. Arthur's sanctuary, usually a place of quiet healing, seemed tense, as if the land itself sensed the storm that was coming. Arthur was waiting for her by the paddock, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the lone figure of Gladiator. The great horse stood apart from the others, his coat glistening with dew, his gaze empty yet restless. Isla approached slowly, her boots sinking into the damp grass, and stood beside Arthur without a word. They watched Gladiator together, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. Suddenly, a memory flickered across Isla's mind. Not her own, but something she felt through the horse. A flash of chaos, the thunder of hooves, a boy's scream, the sickening crunch of bone and metal, the world spinning, then darkness. She gasped, her hand reaching for the fence to steady herself. Arthur glanced at her, eyes narrowing in concern, but said nothing. He didn't have to. They both knew what she had seen. Arthur broke the silence. "He hasn't let anyone near him since that day," he said quietly, voice rough with old pain. "He blames himself, you know. They all said it was my fault, that my methods were too soft, too trusting. But Gladiator, he never forgot." Isla swallowed hard, her throat tight. She looked at Gladiator and saw not just a wounded animal, but a living monument to failure, a creature burdened with the weight of human expectation and grief. "He's not broken," she whispered. "He's just waiting for someone to listen." Arthur turned to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Isla saw the man he must have been before the scandal. Passionate, hopeful, willing to risk everything for what he believed. But now, that fire was banked, smothered by years of regret. "You think you can fix him?" he asked, not unkindly. Isla shook her head. "I don't know, but I want to try." Their fragile connection was shattered by the roar of an engine. A sleek black car pulled up the gravel drive, scattering birds into the sky. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his movements precise and practiced. He carried an envelope, the gold seal of the Royal Veterinary Council gleaming in the pale light. Arthur took the letter with trembling hands, his jaw clenched as he read. "It's from Finch," he said, voice flat. "They're demanding an official assessment of Gladiator. 30 days. If we can't prove he's fit, they'll put him down." The words hung in the air, heavy as a death sentence. Isla felt the ground shift beneath her, the sanctuary no longer a refuge but a battleground. Arthur's composure cracked, anger and desperation flickering across his face. "They want a show," he muttered. "They want you to perform, to save him with a miracle. But healing doesn't work like that. It takes time. It takes trust." Isla's heart pounded. She saw the fear in Arthur's eyes, the way his hands shook as he folded the letter. For the first time, she realized how much he needed her, not just as a student, but as proof that he hadn't been wrong all along. The burden pressed down on her, suffocating. Inside the house, the tension boiled over. Arthur paced the kitchen, voice rising. "We don't have time for gentle progress. They'll kill him, Isla. We have to show results. Now." Isla stood her ground, her own anger rising to meet his. "If you rush this, you'll destroy him. Gladiator isn't a trophy. He's not here to save your reputation." Arthur stopped, breathing hard. The silence stretched, brittle and dangerous. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to do this, Isla. Not just for Gladiator, for me. I need to prove I wasn't a fool. I need to believe it wasn't all for nothing." The truth hit Isla like a slap. She saw herself not as a partner, but as a tool, a means to an end. The realization stung, but it also crystallized her resolve. "I'll help," she said, her voice steady. "But we do it my way. No shortcuts, no tricks, just trust." Arthur nodded, defeated but grateful. "All right, your way." The next days blurred into a routine of quiet effort. Isla spent hours with Gladiator, never pushing, never demanding. She sat in the grass, reading aloud, her voice a gentle thread in the stillness. Sometimes she simply breathed, matching her rhythm to his, letting the silence do the work. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Gladiator began to change. His eyes grew less haunted, his movements more fluid. One morning, as Isla approached, he took a hesitant step toward her, nostrils flaring, ears pricked. It wasn't much, but it was everything. But the world would not wait. The day of the assessment arrived, gray and cold. Isla and Arthur traveled to London, Gladiator trailing behind in a horsebox, his fate hanging in the balance. The Royal Veterinary Council's headquarters was a fortress of glass and steel, its halls echoing with the click of polished shoes and the low murmur of voices. In the hearing room, a long wooden table stretched beneath harsh fluorescent lights. At its head sat Dr. Finch, his face carved from stone, eyes cold and unyielding. Beside him, a young vet named Ben shifted nervously, glancing at Isla with something like sympathy. The room fell silent as Gladiator was led in. Isla stood beside him, her hands folded, her heart thundering in her chest. Finch cleared his throat. "Miss Clarke, if you would demonstrate your method." Isla didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stood, breathing, her presence calm and unwavering. The seconds stretched into minutes, the silence growing unbearable. Then, slowly, Gladiator took a step toward her, his head lowering, his body relaxing for the first time in years. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Finch's mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing a flicker of raw emotion, grief, perhaps, or longing. Ben stared, wide-eyed, as if witnessing something miraculous. The council conferred in hushed tones. Finally, Finch spoke. "We will grant a temporary extension, but you must prove your method works on another case, one of our choosing." The challenge was clear. This was no victory, only a reprieve. As the hearing ended, Ben slipped Isla a USB drive. "You should see the whole story," he whispered. That night, Isla sat in her small room, the glow of the laptop painting her face in blue light. She scrolled through the files, accident reports, veterinary notes, witness statements. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. A tiny, faulty piece of equipment had caused the accident all those years ago. Not Arthur's methods, not Gladiator's spirit. The tragedy had been a cruel twist of fate, not a failure of trust. Isla's hands shook as she closed the laptop. The burden she carried was heavier than ever, but now it was shot through with hope. The past could not be changed, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be understood and forgiven. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she set out for the countryside, determination burning in her chest. She had one more confrontation ahead, and this time she would not be alone. The shadows of the past had shaped her, but they would not define her. Not anymore. The letter from the Royal Veterinary Council sat on the kitchen table, its gold seal glinting in the morning light like a warning. Isla read it twice, hands trembling, then slid it across to Arthur. He didn't speak, but the lines on his face deepened as he scanned the crisp, official language. 30 days to prove Gladiator's progress, or the horse would be euthanized. The sanctuary's fragile peace shattered. The air felt colder, the silence heavier. Even the horses in the paddocks seemed to sense the tension, their movements restless and uncertain. Arthur's composure, so carefully maintained, began to crack. He paced the worn floorboards, muttering under his breath, running a hand through his silver hair. "They want a miracle," he said at last, voice rough with frustration. "They want you to fix him, Isla. They want a show." He turned to her, eyes desperate. "We don't have time for gentle progress. We need results, now." Isla's jaw tightened. "That's not how healing works," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "Gladiator isn't a machine. He's not here to save your reputation or mine. If we rush him, we'll break him for good." The words hung between them, sharp and unyielding. Arthur's face twisted with anger and something like fear. "You don't understand what's at stake," he snapped. "This isn't just about a horse. It's about everything I've fought for, everything I've lost. If we fail, they'll say I was wrong all along, that I ruined lives with my foolish ideals." Isla stared at him, feeling the weight of his confession settle on her shoulders. For the first time, she saw the true cost of Arthur's exile. Not just the loss of his career, but the slow erosion of hope, the gnawing doubt that maybe, just maybe, he really was to blame. She wanted to comfort him, to promise that everything would be all right, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached for Gladiator, letting her presence speak where language failed. The days that followed were a blur of tension and exhaustion. Arthur hovered, watching every session with Gladiator, his anxiety palpable. He pushed Isla to try new techniques, to accelerate the process, to prove her gift. Isla resisted, holding fast to her principles. She spent hours in the pasture, reading aloud, singing softly, simply being near the horse without expectation or demand. Gladiator responded in his own time, sometimes with a nuzzle, sometimes with a flick of his tail, sometimes with nothing at all. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Arthur confronted Isla in the barn. "Why aren't you doing more?" he demanded, voice raw. "Why are you wasting time?" Isla rounded on him, her patience finally snapping. "Because he's not ready. Because you're so desperate to be vindicated that you can't see what he needs. This isn't about you, Arthur. It's about him. And if you can't accept that, then maybe I shouldn't be here." The words echoed in the quiet barn. Arthur's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I can't lose him. Not after everything." Isla softened. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll do our best, but we have to do it right. For Gladiator. For everyone." The next morning brought a new sense of purpose. Isla and Arthur worked together. Their conflict transformed into a fragile partnership. They documented Gladiator's progress. Small victories, subtle changes, moments of trust. Isla kept meticulous notes, filming each session, preparing for the inevitable scrutiny of the council. Arthur, chastened, supported her, though his fear never fully faded. As the deadline approached, the pressure mounted. News of Gladiator's impending assessment leaked to the press. Reporters camped outside the sanctuary gates, their cameras hungry for drama. Social media buzzed with speculation, some rooting for Isla and Arthur, others eager to see them fail. The weight of expectation threatened to crush them both. On the eve of the assessment, Isla sat alone in the paddock, watching the stars emerge one by one. Gladiator stood beside her, his breath warm against her cheek. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet seep into her bones. "We're almost there," she whispered. "Just a little further." The day of reckoning dawned gray and cold. The council's representatives arrived early, Dr. Finch at their head, his expression unreadable. A young vet named Ben accompanied him, clipboard in hand, eyes darting nervously between Isla and Arthur. The assessment was to be rigorous. A full veterinary exam, behavioral tests, and a demonstration of Gladiator's progress. The stable yard became a stage. Isla led Gladiator through each task, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't force him. She invited him. Gladiator responded with quiet confidence, walking, trotting, even allowing Ben to examine his legs and teeth without protest. The council members murmured among themselves, noting the transformation. Finally, Dr. Finch stepped forward. "And now, Miss Clarke, your method." Isla nodded. She stood before Gladiator, breathing deeply, centering herself. The world fell away. The cameras, the council, even Arthur's anxious gaze. There was only the horse and the silent language they shared. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her presence, her intention. Gladiator's ears flicked forward. He took a step toward her, then another, until his head rested gently against her shoulder. The stable yard was utterly still. Even the birds seemed to pause, watching. Dr. Finch cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Impressive," he said, though his tone was guarded. "But one case does not prove a method. We require you to demonstrate similar progress with another animal, one of our choosing. You have 1 week." The ultimatum was clear. Isla's battle was far from over. As the council departed, Arthur pulled her into a rough embrace. "You did it," he murmured, pride and relief warring in his voice. "Whatever happens next, you did it." That night, Isla lay awake, replaying the day's events. She felt both triumphant and terrified. The stakes had never been higher. Not just for Gladiator, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, doubted, or cast aside. She knew the next challenge would be even harder. But for the first time, she believed she could face it. Not alone, but with allies, with truth, and with the quiet, stubborn hope that healing was possible, even in the face of impossible odds. As dawn crept over the hills, Isla rose, ready to begin again. The ultimatum had been delivered. The real test was just beginning. The hearing room was colder than Isla expected. It was a long, windowless chamber in the heart of London, all polished wood and sterile light. The walls lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women who had shaped the Royal Veterinary Council's history. At the head of the table sat Dr. Finch, his posture rigid, his eyes as sharp as ever. Around him were other council members, including a young veterinarian named Ben, whose nervous glances at Isla betrayed a flicker of sympathy beneath the official mask. Arthur sat beside Isla, his hands folded tight in his lap. Gladiator waited just outside, his presence a silent promise and a threat. Isla could feel the pressure in the room, the weight of expectation, the hunger for resolution, the quiet hum of judgment. She tried to steady her breathing, remembering the lessons she'd learned in the sanctuary. Patience, presence, trust. But here, surrounded by the machinery of power, those lessons felt fragile. The proceedings began with formalities. Dr. Finch's voice was clipped, almost mechanical, as he recited the council's mandate and the stakes of the hearing. "This is not a trial," he said, though it felt like one. "We are here to assess whether Gladiator, under the care of Mr. Coleman and Ms. Clarke, has shown sufficient progress to warrant continued life. We are also here to evaluate the legitimacy and safety of Ms. Clarke's methods." Arthur bristled at the last words, but Isla placed a calming hand on his arm. She knew what was at stake. Not just Gladiator's future, but the reputations, and perhaps the souls, of everyone in the room. Ben was the first to speak, his voice tentative. "I've observed Gladiator over the past week. There's been marked improvement in his behavior and physical condition. He's less anxious, more responsive. I believe Ms. Clarke's approach deserves serious consideration." Dr. Finch's lips tightened. "Noted. But anecdotal evidence is not enough. Miss Clarke, please demonstrate your method." Isla nodded, rising from her seat. The room fell silent as she stepped outside to collect Gladiator. The great horse followed her into the chamber, his hooves muffled on the thick carpet. his eyes wary but calm. Isla positioned herself in the center of the room, the council members arrayed around her like a jury. She did not speak. She did not command. Instead, she stood quietly, breathing deeply, letting her presence fill the space between herself and Gladiator. The minutes stretched, the silence deepening. At first, Gladiator stood motionless, his muscles taut, but gradually he relaxed. His ears flicked forward, his head lowered, and slowly, deliberately, he took a step toward Isla. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Ben's eyes widened. Even Dr. Finch seemed momentarily unsettled, his mask slipping to reveal something raw, a memory perhaps, or a longing he dared not name. Isla reached out, palm open. Gladiator pressed his muzzle into her hand, sighing softly. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a miracle. The spell broke as Dr. Finch cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Clarke. That will be all for now." Isla led Gladiator back outside, her heart pounding. When she returned, the council was deep in hushed conversation. Arthur squeezed her hand, his grip trembling. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Finch addressed the room. "The council acknowledges the progress made. However, we require further evidence. Miss Clarke, you are to apply your method to another animal, one with no prior connection to you or Mr. Coleman. If you can demonstrate similar results within 1 week, we will reconsider Gladiator's fate." The ultimatum was clear. Isla nodded, accepting the challenge. She glanced at Ben, who offered a small, encouraging smile. As the council adjourned for the day, Ben lingered behind. He pressed a small USB drive into Isla's hand. "You should know the whole story," he whispered. "It's all there. The accident, the reports, everything they never told you." That night, in her small rented room, Isla plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen filled with documents, veterinary notes, witness statements, accident reports. She read late into the night, piecing together the narrative that had haunted Arthur and Finch for years. The truth was both devastating and liberating. The accident that had destroyed so many lives was not the result of Arthur's soft methods, nor of Gladiator's spirit. It was a mechanical failure, a tiny, faulty piece of equipment missed in the chaos of the race. The blame that had poisoned Arthur and Finch, that had turned colleagues into enemies and cast Gladiator as a scapegoat, was built on a tragic misunderstanding. Isla sat back, tears stinging her eyes. The burden she had carried, of proving herself, of saving Gladiator, of healing old wounds, suddenly felt lighter. She realized that the council's challenge was not just about demonstrating a method. It was about breaking a cycle of blame and fear that had held everyone captive. The next morning, Isla met with Ben in a quiet cafe. "You have to tell them," she said. "They deserve to know the truth." Ben nodded. "I will. But you have to finish what you started. Show them what healing really looks like." For the next week, Isla threw herself into the new challenge. The council assigned her a nervous, neglected mare named Willow. At first, Willow shied away from all contact, eyes wide with mistrust. But Isla was patient. She spent hours in the mare's stall, reading aloud, humming softly, letting Willow come to her in her own time. Progress was slow, sometimes invisible, but Isla persisted. Arthur visited when he could, offering quiet support. He too was changing. The anger and desperation that had once driven him were giving way to something gentler, a cautious hope. The day of the second demonstration arrived. The council gathered once more, their faces inscrutable. Isla entered with Willow, who hesitated at the threshold but, after a long moment, stepped forward, trusting Isla to guide her. In the center of the room, Isla repeated her method: silence, presence, patience. Willow's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. She relaxed, her breathing steady, her eyes soft. She allowed Ben to approach, even to stroke her neck. The room was silent. Dr. Finch stared at Isla, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "We have seen enough." The council retired to deliberate. Isla waited in the corridor, Arthur and Ben at her side. Minutes stretched into an hour. When the council returned, Dr. Finch's voice was softer, almost weary. "Miss Clarke, the council recognizes the validity of your approach. Gladiator will not be euthanized. Furthermore, we recommend that your methods be studied further under proper supervision for the benefit of animal welfare." Relief swept through Isla, so intense it left her dizzy. Arthur hugged her fiercely. Ben grinned, clapping her on the shoulder, but the victory was bittersweet. Isla knew that healing was never simple, never final. There would always be skeptics, always new challenges. Yet for the first time, she felt truly seen, not as a curiosity or a threat, but as someone who had made a difference. As she left the council building, the city's cold air felt bracing, not hostile. She looked up at the sky, a pale wash of blue between the clouds, and allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. The hearing was over, but the real work, of healing, of listening, of building trust, was just beginning. The USB drive felt cold and heavy in Isla's palm as she sat alone in her small room, the city's distant hum muffled by thick curtains. She hesitated only a moment before plugging it into her laptop. The files loaded slowly, a cascade of cryptic names and dates, each one a fragment of a story long buried beneath layers of blame and silence. Isla's heart pounded as she clicked through accident reports, veterinary notes, and witness statements, her eyes scanning for the thread that would unravel the mystery at the heart of everything. The hours slipped by unnoticed. Outside, the sky shifted from gray to black, but Isla barely moved. She read and reread the documents, piecing together the sequence of that fateful day. The race, the chaos, the fall, and the aftermath that had shattered so many lives. Again and again, the same conclusion was drawn in the official reports. Human error, questionable methods, unpredictable animal. But Isla saw something the others had missed. In a single, overlooked maintenance log, she found a note about a faulty buckle on Gladiator's tack, an issue flagged but never addressed before the race. Her breath caught. It wasn't Arthur's gentle approach or Gladiator's spirit that had caused the accident. It was a tiny, mechanical failure, a cruel twist of fate that had nothing to do with trust or training. A wave of anger and relief crashed over her. All these years, Arthur and Finch had been prisoners of a lie, one born not of malice but of fear and the desperate need for answers in the wake of tragedy. Isla leaned back, exhaustion and determination warring inside her. She knew what she had to do. The truth could no longer stay hidden, not if there was any hope of healing for Gladiator, for Arthur, and for Finch. But Isla also understood that facts alone would not be enough. The real wounds ran deeper than any report could reach. They were wounds of trust, of friendship betrayed, of guilt and grief that had calcified into anger. To bring the truth to light, Isla would have to reach not just Finch's mind, but his heart. She didn't return to the council. Instead, she found Finch's address, a modest house on the outskirts of the city, its garden meticulously trimmed but strangely lifeless. The night was cold as Isla approached the door, her hands trembling not with fear, but with the weight of what she was about to do. She knocked, and after a long pause, Finch opened the door, his face drawn and wary. He stared at her in silence, the air thick with unspoken accusation. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice brittle. Isla didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past him, into the hallway where an old dog lay curled on a worn rug. "May I see your dog?" she asked softly. Finch blinked, caught off guard. "She's old, doesn't like strangers." "I won't hurt her," Isla said. She stepped inside, moving slowly, letting the dog sniff her hand. The animal's eyes were cloudy but gentle, her tail thumping weakly as Isla knelt beside her. For a long moment, Isla simply sat, breathing in time with the dog, letting the silence fill the space between them. Finch watched, his guard slowly lowering. "She belonged to my son," he said finally, voice cracking. "Before the accident." Isla nodded. "She trusts you, even after everything." Finch looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I don't deserve it. I failed him. I failed everyone." Isla reached into her pocket, pulling out the maintenance log she'd printed from the USB. She slid it across the floor toward Finch. It wasn't Arthur's fault, or Gladiator's. It was this: a broken buckle. No one saw it until it was too late. Finch stared at the paper, his hands shaking. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly he began to cry, the deep, silent tears of someone who has carried too much pain for too long. Isla stayed beside the dog, offering no words, only presence. When Finch finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "All these years I blamed him. I needed to blame someone. I couldn't face the randomness of it. The idea that something so small could destroy so much." Isla nodded, her own eyes wet. "Sometimes things just break. It's not always someone's fault." A long silence settled between them, heavy but no longer hostile. Finch knelt beside his dog, stroking her fur. "What do I do now?" he asked, lost. "Tell the truth," Isla said. "To Arthur, to the council, to yourself." Finch nodded slowly, the lines of grief on his face softening. "Will you come with me?" The next day, Finch and Isla stood side by side at the council building. Arthur was there too, his posture wary but hopeful. The room was filled with tension, but this time it was different. Finch spoke first, his voice steady but thick with emotion. He told the story of the accident, not as a prosecutor but as a father, a friend, a man finally ready to let go of blame. He presented the maintenance log, admitting his own blindness, his need to find order in chaos. Arthur listened, his eyes shining with unshed tears. When Finch finished, there was a long, aching pause. Then Arthur stepped forward, offering his hand. Finch took it, and in that simple gesture, years of anger and regret began to dissolve. The council, moved by the honesty and vulnerability before them, agreed to clear Arthur's name and to formally recognize Isla's approach as a legitimate path to healing. Gladiator would live, not as a symbol of failure, but as a testament to resilience and forgiveness. That evening, as Isla walked out into the city's dusk, she felt lighter than she had in years. She knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be skeptics, always new wounds to tend. But for the first time, she believed in the possibility of true healing, not just for horses, but for the people who loved them. She glanced back at the council building, where Finch and Arthur stood together, talking quietly. The past could not be changed, but it could be understood, and with courage, forgiven. Isla smiled, ready to face whatever came next, knowing she was no longer alone. The sky was bruised with the last colors of dusk as Isla approached Dr. Finch's house, a modest brick cottage at the edge of the countryside. The garden was immaculate, every hedge clipped to geometric precision. Yet the air felt strangely lifeless, as if beauty had been imposed to keep chaos at bay. Isla hesitated at the gate, her heart pounding, her mind replaying the words she'd rehearsed all day. She wasn't here to argue or accuse. She was here to listen, and to offer something Finch had been denied for years, the chance to be seen as more than the sum of his mistakes. She rang the bell. The door opened slowly, revealing Dr. Finch in a cardigan and slippers, his face drawn, eyes wary. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Isla, her voice barely above a whisper, asked, "May I come in?" Finch nodded, stepping aside. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said, not unkindly. The hallway was lined with old photographs, family portraits, racing trophies, a faded picture of a boy grinning beside a chestnut horse. Isla's gaze lingered there, but she said nothing. Inside, the house was silent except for the soft ticking of a grandfather clock. In the living room, a large, aging dog lay curled on a blanket by the fire. Finch's posture softened as he noticed Isla's interest. "That's Molly," he said quietly. "She was my son's. He used to say she could read his mind." Isla knelt, extending her hand. Molly sniffed, then nudged her head into Isla's palm. The dog's eyes were clouded but gentle, her tail thumping weakly. Isla stroked her fur, letting the silence stretch. She sensed Finch watching, his defenses wavering. "You know," Isla said softly, "sometimes animals understand us better than we do ourselves. They don't judge. They just stay." Finch sat down heavily in an armchair, his hands trembling. "I used to think I understood horses, people too. But after the accident," his voice trailed off, thick with old pain. Isla looked up, meeting his gaze. "You lost more than your son's future that day. You lost your friend, your trust in yourself, maybe even your hope." Finch's eyes filled with tears. "I blamed Arthur. I needed to blame someone. If it wasn't his fault, then maybe it was mine. Or maybe it was just—" He stopped, unable to finish. Isla shook her head gently. "Sometimes things break, Dr. Finch. Not because someone failed, just because the world is fragile." Molly shifted, pressing closer to Finch. He reached down, stroking her head, and for a moment, the years of anger and guilt seemed to melt away. "My son loved Gladiator," he whispered. "He never blamed the horse. He just missed riding, missed the feeling of flying." Isla's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I've seen the reports, the maintenance log. It was a broken buckle, a piece of metal, not a broken method or a broken man." Finch closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "All these years, I couldn't face it. I thought if I just kept fighting, kept proving I was right, maybe the pain would go away. But it never did." Isla moved to sit across from him, her presence quiet but unwavering. "You're not alone in this. Arthur's been carrying his own pain too. And Gladiator, he's still waiting for someone to forgive him." A silence settled, deep and healing. Finch looked at Isla, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a threat, not as a curiosity, but as a fellow traveler on the long, hard road of grief and hope. "Why did you come?" he asked, voice raw. Isla smiled, a small, sad smile. "Because I know what it's like to carry a burden that isn't yours, and because I believe that healing starts with listening." Finch nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can ever make it right." but I want to try." They sat together as the fire burned low, Molly's breathing a steady rhythm in the quiet room. For the first time in years, Finch allowed himself to remember. Not just the pain, but the love, the laughter, the moments before everything changed. He spoke in halting sentences, recalling his son's joy, Arthur's friendship, the early days when hope was easy and the future seemed bright. Isla listened, saying little, offering only her presence. She didn't try to fix him, didn't offer platitudes or promises. She simply stayed, bearing witness to his pain and his longing. As midnight approached, Finch stood, wiping his eyes. "I need to see Arthur," he said. "I need to tell him the truth." Isla nodded. "He's waiting. We all are." They left the house together, stepping into the cool night. The garden, so carefully tended, seemed softer now, the edges less harsh. Molly trotted beside them, her tail wagging, as if sensing that something broken had begun to mend. As they drove toward Arthur's sanctuary, the road winding through fields silvered by moonlight, Finch's voice was quiet but resolute. "Thank you, Isla, for not giving up, for reminding me that forgiveness is possible." Isla smiled, her own heart lighter than it had been in years. "It's not about forgetting," she said. "It's about letting go of the need to hurt." When they arrived, Arthur was waiting by the gate, his silhouette framed by the glow of the stable lights. For a moment, the three stood in silence, the past and future balanced on a knife's edge. Then Finch stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." Arthur took his hand, his own eyes shining. "So am I." In that moment, the years of anger and regret fell away, leaving only the possibility of something new, a future built not on blame, but on understanding. As dawn broke over the fields, Isla watched Gladiator graze in the soft light, his coat gleaming, his eyes peaceful. She knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more wounds to heal, more truths to face. But for the first time, she believed in the power of forgiveness, not as an ending, but as a beginning. And in the quiet, as the world woke to a new day, Isla understood. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply stay, to listen, to forgive, and to hope. The fire in Dr. Finch's living room had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Outside, the countryside was silent, the world holding its breath as if waiting for something to break. Isla sat across from Finch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she barely tasted. The old dog, Molly, lay between them, her breathing slow and steady, a quiet anchor in the storm of emotion that hung in the air. Finch stared into the flames, his face drawn and pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For a long time he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Isla waited, sensing that words would come when he was ready. She had learned, through horses and heartbreak, that some wounds only opened in the presence of patience. Finally, Finch spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I was there, Isla. I saw it all. The day of the accident. The day everything changed." His hands trembled as he set his mug aside. "I've replayed it 1,000 times in my mind, trying to find the moment I could have stopped it. But there isn't one. There never was." Isla listened, her breath shallow. She knew this was the moment, the heart of the story, the confession that would determine whether healing was possible. Finch's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "My son. He was so alive that morning. He loved Gladiator, trusted him in a way I never could. I remember watching them in the paddock, the way the horse responded to every shift of his weight, every whisper. Arthur was there too. He believed in them both. He believed in me. Finch's voice cracked, and I let him down. He paused, gathering himself. When the accident happened, it was chaos. Screaming, shouting, the sound of metal and bone. I ran to my son, but I couldn't help him. I couldn't help anyone. And when it was over, when the dust settled, I needed someone to blame. I needed to make sense of the senseless. Isla's eyes stung. She thought of all the nights she'd spent searching for meaning in her own pain, the desperate need to find order in a world that so often refused to provide it. Finch continued, voice thick with regret. It was easier to blame Arthur's methods, easier to say he was reckless, that he put my son in danger. Easier than admitting that sometimes things just break. Sometimes the world is cruel for no reason at all. He looked up, meeting Isla's gaze. I said terrible things. I turned the industry against him. I destroyed our friendship. And all the while I carried this guilt, this anger, like a shield. He wiped his eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. I see you with Gladiator, Isla. I see the way you listen, the way you wait. I see what I lost, the ability to trust, to hope. I see my son in you. He would have understood. He would have forgiven. Isla reached across the table, her hand resting gently on Finch's. You don't have to carry this alone anymore, she said softly. Arthur deserves to hear the truth. So do you. Finch nodded, his shoulders shaking. I know. I'm tired of running from it. I'm tired of being angry. He took a deep breath, the sound ragged but resolute. Will you stay with me when I call him? Isla squeezed his hand. Of course. Finch picked up the phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Arthur's number. The line rang once, twice, then Arthur's voice came through. Cautious, uncertain. Finch? Finch's voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. Arthur, I'm sorry. I should have said it years ago. I blamed you for something that was never your fault. I let my grief turn to anger, and I took it out on you. I see that now. I'm so sorry. There was a long silence on the other end. Isla held her breath, afraid the moment would collapse under the weight of so much pain. But then Arthur spoke, his voice trembling. I've missed you, Alistair. I've missed my friend. Finch's tears fell in earnest now. I want to make it right. I want to help you. To help Gladiator. To help Isla. Arthur's voice was gentle. Then come. Let's face it together. Finch hung up, his hands shaking. He looked at Isla, a tentative hope flickering in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. You gave me back my courage. The next day, Finch and Isla drove to Arthur's sanctuary. The drive was quiet, but the silence was no longer strained. It was the silence of two people who had survived the storm and were ready to rebuild. When they arrived, Arthur was waiting by the paddock, Gladiator grazing nearby, the morning sun painting gold across the fields. Arthur and Finch faced each other, the years of anger and regret visible in every line of their faces. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Finch stepped forward, his voice steady. I'm sorry, Arthur, for everything. Arthur nodded, his own eyes bright with emotion. We all lost something that day, but maybe it's time to stop letting it define us. Finch smiled, a small, broken thing, but real. I'd like that. Isla watched as the two men embraced, the past finally allowed to rest. She felt a weight lift from her own shoulders, the burden of secrets, of blame, of wounds left to fester. In that moment, she understood that true healing was not about erasing pain, but about sharing it, allowing it to be seen and accepted. Later, as they sat together in the kitchen, Arthur poured tea for everyone, his hands steady for the first time in years. Finch spoke quietly, telling Isla about his son, the joy he found in riding, the laughter that filled their home before the accident. Arthur shared stories, too, about the early days of hope, about the dreams they once dared to chase together. The sun climbed higher, the shadows receding. In the warmth of that small room, Isla felt something she had never known before, a sense of belonging, of family not bound by blood, but by forgiveness. As the afternoon faded, Arthur turned to Isla. "You started this, Isla. You brought us together. What will you do now?" Isla smiled, her heart full. "I want to help others find what we found here. A place to heal, a place to listen." Arthur nodded. "Then let's build it. Together." And as the three of them looked out over the fields, Gladiator grazing peacefully, Isla knew the journey was not over. But for the first time, the road ahead was bright with possibility, paved not with fear or regret, but with hope, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of those who choose to listen. The morning of the opening ceremony dawned bright and cool, the Welsh hills rolling green and gold beneath a sky swept clean by last night's rain. Isla stood at the edge of the new grounds, her hands folded quietly in front of her, heart fluttering with a strange, steady joy. The Coleman Clarke Center for Connection was no longer just a dream or a promise whispered in the dark. It was real, a place built not on the pursuit of trophies or the need to prove anyone right or wrong, but on the simple, radical idea that healing could begin with listening. The center itself was unlike anything the equestrian world had seen. There were no grandstands, no banners proclaiming champions. Instead, open paddocks stretched beside sunlit therapy rooms and quiet gardens where horses and people could move at their own pace. The main hall was filled with light, its walls lined with photographs. Arthur as a young man, Dr. Finch and his son, Isla with Nix and Gladiator, and dozens of snapshots of children and animals, each image a testament to the possibility of trust restored. Guests gathered in small clusters, trainers, veterinarians, former skeptics, and families whose lives had been quietly changed by what had happened here. Reporters hovered at the edges, their notebooks ready, but the mood was gentle, expectant. Arthur stood near the entrance, his silver hair catching the sun, greeting old friends and rivals alike with a humility that came from hard-won peace. Dr. Finch, thinner now, but somehow lighter, moved through the crowd with Molly at his side, pausing often to listen, to share a quiet word, to accept a handshake or a hug. Isla watched them both, feeling the weight of the past years settle into something softer. She remembered the first day she'd met Arthur, the haunted look in his eyes, the night she'd sat with Finch, the silence between them full of things too painful to name. She remembered Gladiator's trembling, the way even hope had seemed dangerous then. And she remembered the moment when everything had changed, not with a victory or a miracle, but with a confession, a forgiveness, a willingness to begin again. The ceremony was simple. Arthur spoke first, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "We built this place for everyone who has ever felt broken by the world's demands, for every animal and every person who has been told they are too much or not enough. Here, we start with listening, with trust, with the belief that healing is possible, even when it seems impossible." Dr. Finch followed, his speech shorter, but no less moving. "For years, I thought strength meant certainty. I was wrong. True strength is the courage to admit you were wrong, to ask for help, to forgive. This center is not just for horses, but for all of us who need to remember how to be gentle, with others and with ourselves. Then it was Isla's turn. She stepped to the front, her voice quiet but unwavering. We don't have all the answers, but we have a space to begin. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to listen. To an animal, to another person, to yourself. That's where healing starts. There was no applause, just a deep, collective breath, a moment of shared understanding that rippled through the crowd. And then, quietly, the work began. Children and parents wandered into the paddocks, meeting horses who had once been deemed untrainable. Therapists and trainers led sessions in the gardens, their voices low, their movements gentle. Isla moved among them, sometimes guiding, sometimes simply watching. Her presence a steady reassurance. In the afternoon, as the sun warmed the fields, a small group gathered by the far paddock. There Gladiator stood, older now, his coat flecked with gray, but his eyes bright and clear. Beside him sat Dr. Finch's son, now a young man, his wheelchair parked in the grass. He reached up, slowly, and began to brush Gladiator's mane. The horse stood perfectly still, his head lowered, his breath calm. For a long time, neither moved. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath. Isla watched from a distance, tears prickling at her eyes. She saw not just two survivors of the same tragedy, but two beings, boy and horse, who had found a way to forgive the world and themselves. It was not a dramatic moment, not the climax of a story, but the quiet, ongoing work of healing. It was, she realized, what she had been searching for all along. As the day faded into evening, the center grew quiet. The last guests drifted away. The horses settled in their stalls. The gardens glowed in the golden light. Isla walked the grounds with Arthur and Finch, their conversation easy, full of laughter and memories. They spoke of plans for the future, new programs, new partnerships, new ways to reach those who needed help most. Before leaving, Finch's son wheeled over to Isla. He looked up, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving us a place to start again." Isla smiled, her heart full. "We all needed it," she replied. "Sometimes that's all it takes." As night fell, Isla stood alone in the paddock, Gladiator grazing nearby. She breathed in the cool air, the scent of grass and earth, the distant sound of laughter from the house. She felt the scars of her own past, of loneliness, of fear, of not belonging, soften into something new. Not gone, but gentler, forgiven. She remembered the words she'd spoken at the ceremony. We don't have all the answers, but we have a space to begin. That was enough. The Coleman Clark Center for Connection was just one place in a wounded world, but it was proof that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. Not through force, not through spectacle, but through patience, presence, and the courage to listen. In the final light, Isla reached out and touched Gladiator's mane, feeling the warmth of life beneath her hand. The horse turned, nuzzling her gently, and for a moment, everything was quiet, whole, and possible. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere, a door opened. And in that gentle, hopeful silence, Isla understood. Healing was never the end of the story. It was always the beginning.